Hi, my name is Lisa, and today I'm going to be walking you through how to paint this flamingo using watercolors. For a full list of everything you need to get started, check out the video description below. And be sure to hit the subscribe button if you want to see other videos just like this one, and hit the like button if you enjoyed painting with me. Let's get started. So for sketching out the flamingo, I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible for you guys so that you can follow along with me. It's a very simple shape and we're not going to get into a lot of the details. So whenever I sketch out something like a flamingo, I would want to do a very loose outline to get a sense of the proportion. So I would basically just draw very loosely the neck and beak, and then wrap around and show the feathers here. And this does not look at all like what I want it to look like. It just, you can see if I zoom in a little bit here, you can see that I've just drawn a very basic outline. And this allows me to know, okay, this is about how much of the paper it's gonna end up taking up. And that way I don't start with the detail and then end up taking up way too much of the paper. It just gives me a good sense of proportion. So for the bill, we're gonna do a straight line down at a 45 and then curve around and then come back up. And the end of a flamingo's beak is always black, so we'll draw sort of a loose line of where that black line is gonna be. And then going through, there's sort of a wavy line that represents the mouth. So we'll just kind of keep that loose too. And then we're gonna come back, and the beak ends kind of right here, but the white part of the beak comes back up. So we're gonna come up and then form a little circle for the eye. So you can kind of see, I'm drawing it a little bit dark than I normally would, but make sure you're keeping your sketches nice and light. Because that way when we draw color over top with the watercolors, we're not seeing all these pencil lines. So after we've got the beak shape in and the eye has a little black circle in the middle, we're gonna come back and add the top of the head, and then back, and then the bottom of the head. And we're gonna come back till we've got about the thickness of the neck that we want. So we're stopping here, and this is gonna allow us to come back and draw the neck. And the neck isn't perfect, so if your lines aren't perfect, that's actually good. You don't want it to be perfectly smooth, because a flamingo's neck is not perfectly smooth. It has some bumps and ridges. So that's about the shape you want to have. Nice S curve. And then we're just going to kind of loosely draw where the feathers would go. So that's kind of just a dome shape. We're not going to draw all the feathers on for this piece because that's not the level of detail we're doing on this one. So now I'm going to erase some of those previous lines from where I outlined how big I wanted it to go. And you should be left with a shape that kind of looks like this. And then we can get started with adding the color. So with a painting like this, we always want to start from lightest to darkest. So we're going to do all of the light blue areas first. So that's basically just right around here. And we're going to add a little bit of teal in here. So taking my angled brush, I like to use the brush that has a bit of a angle at it and goes to a tip. You can also use a brush like this that's round and then has a tip. It's all what you have around and what you're comfortable using. So first things first, we're just going to add a little bit of clear water on the top of the beak or bill. And then we're just going to drop in a tiny bit of teal. That's all we're doing for this layer. Tiny bit of teal here. Have it come around. So that's basically all of the teal you want to have right there. And then I'm going to add a little bit down here. So just using my brush very loosely, I'm just going to throw some swaths of clear water on. And then I want to add, I'm just going to take the teal and just drop it in like that. Or a little darker up here. And because we're not doing the details of all the feathers, that's about all you want to have for the first layer. Then we're going to let this dry fully, and we're going to go and add over top of that. But for now, we can actually go in and add some of the pink, just because this area doesn't have any teal on it. So if we go ahead and add clear water right here, And just butt up to your other clear water where your blue is, or your teal, sorry. Don't actually touch it, because if you touch it with clear water, the pink's gonna end up circling around and covering the whole bill. So here we just wanna drop in some of that nice bright pink you have. Any shade of pink you have will work. I feel like there's so much variations of flamingos in the wild in terms of their color. Some have a bit more orange to them. So basically we're just dropping in a little bit of pink and allowing it to bleed into the water versus painting all the pink in. I'm gonna take a little more pink and add it right here where that blue is. And I want this just the tiniest little bit because we don't want it to go too crazy. And just kind of take your brush with a light amount of pink and draw some light lines where that teal is. And that's all you want to have for that beak layer. And then we're gonna actually just let this dry 100%, and I'll show you how to do the pink here as well as the dark colors. All right, so now that the beak's had a chance to dry, we can go in and add the pink without worrying about whether or not it's gonna bleed into the blue. So for the pink, we're gonna actually just do the same as before. We're gonna add clear water first. So filling up this whole head portion with clear water. Being sure to leave the eye with no clear water, as well as the beak. So we're gonna come around and follow the shape that we've previously drawn out. And we're just filling it all in. So you can turn your page around and make your way around. And the faster you work on this layer, the better. If you need to pause it, that's totally fine. I'm gonna come all the way around here. And if you have a bigger brush that allows you to work faster, that's good. We don't want the clear water drying before we get a chance to add the paint, so. I'm just filling it all in. And if you end up missing some spots, that's no big deal. We can always add those after, or sometimes a few white spots can actually look really cool, so don't worry too much. The key is to just get clear water on as fast as you can while keeping it somewhat in the lines. So I've done that now, and now what I'm gonna do is take a really bright pink. So I'm gonna take my pink and just smush my brush in it as much as I can, and that way when I drop that pink in right near the base of the head, it's gonna look nice and bright. We're not drawing every little feather on this one because this is a very loose painting, very beginner friendly, so I'm just kind of making my way around. We're gonna do a few different variations of colors in here. This is the basic shape we're trying to get in. I'm gonna take a bit of orange now, and I'm gonna lead this to the orange here. And then I want my pink to come around behind. And it's okay if you have little spots that aren't filled in, that's what we want. Just kind of bring it around. The key right now is to get a layer of color down. And from the orange, take a bit of yellow. So now we're going yellow, and we're just gonna come back down. And then we're gonna take a little more pink along the top. And then along here. And so I'm just gonna keep adding color and keep going as it dries. Just always working my way back. I'm gonna add a little bit of purple near the head just to keep it nice and dark. Not all these colors you see in the flamingo necessarily, but this is just an artistic interpretation of one, so it's okay if it has a few different colors that you'd normally see. And then what I want to do is add some swaths of color for the wings. So basically I'm just gonna swipe my brush down like this. It's very loose, and then swipe the brush with the pink. And for these, it's not important that they look amazing on this layer because we're just trying to get loose shapes down. And then I'm coming back to this. So I'm always kind of bouncing around, and I know it can be a little tricky to follow, so feel free to pause it, rewind it. I do have to work fairly fast with the clear water, so that's why I do bounce around. With a painting like this, it is a little more advanced, so you may have to try it a couple of times if you're not familiar with watercolors. But I do find it fun to teach some that are a little trickier, just so that we can push ourselves. And if you have done a lot of my tutorials and you are getting used to working with the watercolors, it is fun to try something a little harder. I'm gonna take a little purple and just put that in here too. And you can just kind of play with your brush till you get some of these nice white motions. And this is drying up here, but while it's still wet, I'm just gonna throw in a little bit of orange as well, so that the yellow and the orange can kind of blend together. And then I'm gonna go like this and just be always wiping the brush down. So you're gonna see, now as it's drying, you're gonna start to see some brush marks. And that's why it was so important to have a layer that had no brush marks and a layer that does, because now you can see the previous layer through it. And if some of them go outside, that's okay. So it looks like feathers coming out now. And that's why having a tip on your brush is really helpful, because it allows you to have both the swaths of color as well as the detail. So this is a good point to show you a technique that I want to use on this, and that's using a toothbrush to paint. Now with loose watercolor, it is fun to use different types of brushes, and I really like the look of the toothbrush. And what I do is I dip my toothbrush in the water, in the paint. It has water on it already. And then once I have a good amount of paint on it, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tilt this sideways, and then I'm gonna flick the paint on. And my page is still wet, so it's gonna get me a lot of variation. I was just trying to have some fun texture there where the wings are. And then I can go ahead over top and I can do some splatters too if I want. So it's kind of just playing around with texture. This is a great painting to have fun getting used to different ways of painting, different ways of adding splatters. If you splatter at a 45-degree angle, you'll see they go crazy. So I'm just trying to insinuate that the body keeps going, and that's part of that loose watercolor. So now that you'll notice that this is still wet, this is still wet, but now that it's started to dry, a technique I like to do with loose watercolor, I know I'm throwing a lot at you right now, but a technique I like to do is to take some clear water and create sort of a, wipe that up, sort of a blob shape, and not touching the flamingo yet, but then waiting to the last second and then grabbing a little bit of color as I come down. And what's gonna happen is that's gonna bleed out and create a nice little bloom. And I'm gonna try and do that down here too. So I'm adding clear water first, not touching, and then, oh, I let the brush touch at some point. Same thing here, I can just let the brush touch, and that's gonna give you real loose style. So I think I could use one up here. And these are good to do when your painting is partially dry. And if it's totally wet, it's not a good time to do it, because then what's gonna happen is you're gonna lose all of your color. Even here, I'm losing a little more color than I'd like. So I'm just gonna dab up a little of the clear water. And what happens when you dab up some of the clear water is it's gonna bleed less. So you're gonna see as this dries, that's gonna create a really nice effect. So this part here, we might as well work on while the rest of the painting is drying. So I'm always spinning my painting around, but that just allows me to work on it a little easier. I like to paint with a watercolor block because it allows me to be moving the picture around all the time. So for this beak, it is black, but I do like to start with a purple. So I have a very dark purple, and I'm just gonna drop that in. And that way when I add the black over top, you're still gonna see sheens of purple through it, and I really like that look. Then I'm gonna take the black, and I'm gonna just draw a thin line coming up to that. And this might be a stage of the painting where you're starting to feel like it's a little chaotic. You're not sure how to feel about it yet, but just stay with me, follow it through. Once we add all of those little details, I think you're gonna be quite happy with it. But yes, sometimes when you're right in the middle of a painting, it can look a little chaotic, especially with this loose watercolor. So what I wanna do now is add some feather texture. You'll notice that it's still wet, and that's okay. If it's fully dry, that's also okay. So I'm just gonna take the tip of my brush and just add some strokes that represent the feathers. So where it's still wet, they're gonna bleed like crazy, and where it's dry, you're gonna see some texture. And that's what I want. A painting like this for me, typically, if it wasn't a tutorial, I would typically work on this over a few days and just keep adding to it and add several layers. So if you have the patience for it and you want to try, just keep adding layers and keep them each layer as light as possible. It's okay to do less. It's not a problem. It's still going to make a great painting, but I do like the effect of having several layers. So I'm going to take a little purple now, add some of that here. And I just keep building and building on it. So building back here. And like I said, if it's wet still, they're gonna bleed like crazy. So as you're layering, you're gonna get some really cool effects that you didn't expect. So I'm pretty happy with that amount of color on the body. I'm gonna add a few more swipes of pink just up here. Just add a bit more detail, and I'm gonna darken this black because as it's drying, I'm noticing that this black here, it's lightening up more than I'd like. So I'm going to just color over that. But I think that's pretty good. What I'm gonna do now is let this fully dry, and then we're gonna go in and add the eye and add a bit more detail. But I think this is good for this layer. All right, so now that it's had a second to dry, more than a few seconds because I use blow dryer. We're gonna go ahead and add the eye. Now the eye is a bright yellowy lime green color. So basically what you wanna do is just fill in the entire eye. Because we can add the black after, but you always wanna start with the lighter color. So I'm gonna add that in. And that's all I wanna do for the eye, and we're gonna let that dry while we go back and add a bit more detail on some of the rest of it. Hopefully at this stage you're getting to a point where you are happy with it. With watercolor, the nice part is it is a fairly quick medium, so you can always start again if there's something you want to try for next time. And I'm going to draw a little black line right here for the nose. And then I'm going to take purple and draw a thin purple line right here, thin purple line right here. And then I'm gonna take a really saturated purple and I'm gonna actually go through and draw a few lines on the outside. If you do post on social media, make sure you tag me. I'm on Instagram. I'm whitehouse_art. I've been loving seeing all of your paintings. People have been tagging me and it's great. I love to see what you come up with. I love seeing how much fun people are having. I do offer kids tutorials as well if you check out my channel. The tutorials are just a little easier for kids to follow, but adults are welcome to do it too. If you're new to watercolor, sometimes the kids ones can actually be a little easier to start with. They just run through the basics of using the wet and wet technique, so it really helps. So I'm just kind of going around and adding a little detail with the purple. Purple's nice and dark. It's not quite black. Black can be a little harsh with watercolor, so I like to use it sparingly, if at all. And I'm just adding a few purple feathers here and there, so I'm working a little erratically, but that's because I like to always lay down a few, stand back, see how I feel about it. I'm gonna add a bit more pink here around the eye. because I want it to be nice and dark right at the face. Flamingo's faces are actually a little darker pink typically than their bodies. So I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's a good amount of color. As I said, if you want to just keep layering and layering and layering, that never hurts. At this point, I've noticed as I've been working my way around, my eye has dried. So now I'm going to take an extremely fine brush and I'm going to outline the eye. And if you find you have more control, you can always use a black pen, but it is good to get well practiced in using these fine brushes. And typically what you can do with an eye is if you want to have a little glow spot, that's where you put like a little white dot. You can always do it after with a bit of white paint. It can be quite tricky, especially when you're starting out, to leave that spot white. So I'm happy with that. I feel like it could use a little more here. And I'm going to throw in a little red too, because I think a little red would be fun. Maybe some little red lines here. You can just keep adding in the same motions as before. And now that this is all pretty much the way I like it, I'm gonna add a little white at the end, but I'm gonna do a few more splatters. So I'm gonna take my pink and over top, I'm just gonna add some fun splatters. Going out, over here. Less is more with splatters, but on a piece like this, I've gone a little crazy, so I'm okay with adding a little more than I normally would. Add a few yellow ones down here. I'm gonna add a few more pink ones up over top of here. So I'm not a fan of how big some of those got, so I might just dab those up. And that's the same goes for you. If you have a paper towel around, you can always dab up some of the ones that you just feel like too much. But I'm pretty happy with that. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let this dry again, and then we'll come back and see what kind of detail we wanna add. All right, so now that my painting's done, I can see there's a few little details I wanna add with white. I like to use a white poster paint, but any white paint will work for this. So I'm gonna add a little white dot just on the eye here. And then I'm gonna make sure the eye is outlined in white because I feel like it got filled in a little more than I would have liked. And then I'm just gonna add some little highlights in places. So just taking the white, I'm gonna loosely add some little highlights. So I have a fairly fine brush here. Sometimes these little highlights can just brighten up a painting. So I just kind of made my way around and added a few. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed painting along with me. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you want to see other videos just like this one. And please hit the like button if you enjoyed painting along with me. And like I mentioned earlier, if you do share it on social media, I love when you tag me Whitehouse_art on Instagram and Lisa Whitehouse Art on Facebook. I love to see what you guys are creating. Thank you so much for painting along with me. Have a great day.